Welcome everybody to the Rye-Town Park Commission meeting of January 16th, 2018. Please rise, and will Emily Hurd lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I'd like to first welcome our new commissioners, Mayor Josh Cohn of the City of Rye, and his appointee, Emily Hurd, Councilwoman of the City of Rye. And I have, at the last Rye Town Council meeting, reappointed Ben Salanitro as my appointment to the Rye Town Park Commission. So welcome, and I'm sure that we will all work well together for the betterment of Rye Town Park. Roll call, please, Deb.
Commissioner Hurd,
Here.
Commissioner Cohn,
Here.
Commissioner Rosenberg,
Here.
Commissioner Salanitro,
Here.
Commissioner Falenka, absent, and President Zuckerman.
Here. The Portchester representatives are not here because they have an executive session. All of the trustees are occupied, so there's no other representative. We will need 4 votes to approve any matter, which is the majority of the commission. The first matter is adoption of minutes, and I understand that both the City of Rye representatives, this being their first meeting, feel uncomfortable about approving the minutes of December 19th. So we will pass on that until the next Park Commission meeting, when hopefully we'll have 4 members who attended that meeting. Next is the Park Management Report. Deb, are you giving that? Or is...
Sure. I can give it.
And the report is in the packet, so just do the highlights.
Yes. So on the whole, Rye Town Park in the month of January, or the end of December and the month of January, is a pretty cold, sleepy place with not much going on. That said, we had one heck of a polar bear plunge on January 1st.
No pictures?
There are many pictures. Actually had a fair amount of press coverage.
Really?
Yeah.
Yes.
And I was there.
And,
Were you?
President Zuckerman was there, dressed.
I was there, but I did not plunge.
That was one cold day.
It was very cold.
But it was a huge success.
I actually have pictures in my camera.
I would say the other, in terms of caretaking, operations are really very quiet. Caretaker George Hogbin, who works for the town of Rye, does an evening inspection of all town of Rye properties, and he discovered a significant leak pouring down the hill last Wednesday, and put out a call of alert, and Rye City Police responded. Let's see. He also, the deputy head of maintenance, Paul Cancel, responded. The 2 of them turned the water off and discovered that we had 2 toilets in the men's room that had pipes that burst. So those issues have been addressed.
Who else responded?
Excuse me. I responded, as did President Zuckerman and Town Councilman Tom Nardi, who is a licensed plumber. So all of us were there as well, taking a look at what had happened, doing an inspection of the rest of the properties to see if there were other exploded pipes that hadn't yet been discovered. So far, so good. The immediate issue's been addressed. Also, this past Saturday, there was a meeting at the park attended by Commissioner Salanitro, Councilman Nardi, again, Deputy Head of Maintenance Paul Cancel, and myself, and we discussed various aspects with regard to heating the buildings. The furnace has been going on through the winter, and we were exploring why that was. And it was determined that to keep the buildings, and I think Commissioner Salonicha will be able to speak to this much more with a much more informed stance than I, that it's much healthier for the buildings if we keep some level of heat going in the bathrooms to preserve the pipes and prevent further freezing and other kinds of degradation to the building. So that was determined. However, the hot water heater has been turned off and the water drained and et cetera. In terms of grounds care, you're going to be hearing today a thorough presentation with regard to pond maintenance. That was an issue that has come up several times, most recently in November, I believe, with regard to how we're caring for the pond and what do we know about the chemicals that we're adding to the pond. Is it helping us achieve the mission, or is it posing a danger, and what do we need to know? And in response to that, last month, Bill Lawyer, myself, and 2 members of the Friends of Rytown Park attended a full-day pond care conference. At that conference, we met Catherine McGlynn of the Department of Environmental Conservation, and I would say that James Gorman of the Pond and Lake Connection, who is here tonight, are here for the purpose of educating us on pond care and what we're doing so that we can make an informed decision about how to proceed. And that's it. The finance team has been working on budgets and year end. That's kind of it. I had a meeting with the senior lifeguard staff a couple of weeks ago to review how things went in terms of staffing levels and budgets. Last year, we developed a recruitment plan for next year so that we could address some of the issues we encountered with overtime and recruiting of new staff, training, etc. And I'll be meeting with the security rangers next week.
Thank you. Any questions on the management report from the commissioners? The next item is the financial analysis for 2017 and a preliminary budget discussion regarding 2018. We were not as successful in 17 as we were the last year. There are several reasons for that. We have a member of our accounting team, Navy Jajanovic, to discuss the financial analysis.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Navy Jajanovic with Maya Murky and Justic, and I believe what you have in front of you are 3 documents. One should be November financials, and then December, and then an analysis. I think it'd probably be most beneficial if we go straight through to December. So what we did is we closed the December financials for the year, and these numbers are basically the numbers that are going to go to the auditors with, I think, one exception that was made this afternoon, which I'll talk about in a minute. So just to highlight a few things, as you can see here, we ran the year at a almost $28,000 deficit. That's the second column. And a lot of that happened, there were some extenuating circumstances that we weren't able to predict as we prepared the budget and as we ran the park. The $27,000, most of that, about $26,000 of that, was related to our tenant, the restaurant, to Homestyle Caterers. For the first time, we were responsible for the utilities, so $26,000 of that deficit, as you can see there, in the utilities line item is higher than budgeted. It was related to Homestyle Caterers, and I believe, Debbie, correct me if I'm wrong, we decided today that we would invoice Homestyle Caterers for the $26,000, and that will offset the.
I decided it on Friday, but I
Oh, you
let
did?
you know today.
So what that will do is get us closer to a break even for 2017. So we'll book an AR adjustment. And so this will get us to, we should end up at a deficit of a couple of $1,000. So that was a big hit that we weren't expecting. The other major hit, and Debbie touched on it earlier, was salaries. We had some offsetting salaries and some larger expenses in the salaries area as it related to trying to get coverage, whether it was overtime, lifeguards, the different areas. And so it cost us a lot more to run the park, whether it was after hours, extended hours, and also into the fall, because we had some really good weather in September. And so we spent $60,000 more than we anticipated or budgeted. And part of Debbie's consultation with talking about lifeguards and going forward with a budget is trying to have a more realistic sense of what we're going to spend in 2018, and also plan for it in terms of staffing and FTEs so that we don't incur such great overtime, because overtime is time and a half. But for 2017, we did incur more charges, and a lot of that was also, if you look at the first line item, we terminated our relationship with our director mid-year, I should say mid-season in August, and so that was a little bit less than budgeted, but it cost us in the other areas for coverage. Okay?
Let me just interject one thing. Kind of skipped over the reason for the deficit in terms of wages was we actually had good weather in September. And much of our staff goes back to school. So we didn't have, for example, cashiers to collect money at, for parking, for the beach. And yet we had to maintain staff for safety reasons. We had to have maintenance staff, we had to have lifeguards on duty because people were using the facility, which is great. They should be using the facility. But we need to possibly plan in the future whether we should adjust our parking rates for the shoulder season a little bit. And also, Debbie had come up with the idea that instead of having just kids as cashiers, for example, we look for some retired people who could be there in September and even early October to maintain the staffing level that we need so that we don't run into this problem again. I think this may be the first time we ever had this kind of a problem, but on the one hand, it's nice that people use the beach. On the other hand, it's not nice that we lost money. So, as always, we need to achieve a balance.
Right.
Okay, I'm sorry to
Oh,
interrupt.
that's okay, that's fine. And then as it relates to operational expenses on the lower part of the schedule, if you pull out, we had some extraordinary items. So we had a miscellaneous, we needed, the auditors asked us to evaluate our assets, and so we had to have a company come in and do an inventory asset valuation. That cost us about $8,200. That wasn't budgeted, and that also had to be expensed. And then we had a $7,200 payout to Seaside Chinese. That's in the $15,000 fluctuation. It's in total $35,000 miscellaneous. So that was a little bit, obviously, more than we had budgeted. The other line item that you'll see jumps out at you operationally is the $104,000 on building and ground maintenance. We had a few things that were not capitalizable, meaning that they didn't add value or extend the life of our asset, and they related to $18,000 emergency repairs of the admin building. We had about $6,000 emergency sewer repairs, and then we had another $69,000, almost $7,000 in electric repairs. Again, these items were expense in nature and not capitalizable. So we had some things obviously happen to the grounds and to the property that we weren't anticipating, which caused the fluctuation. But if you look at all the other items operationally, we managed to keep the expenses in line, if not less than initially budgeted. So our struggle this year, or this season I should say, was definitely with the revenue side. So the pavilion revenue didn't come in where we thought it would be. We also, obviously the rental income on the concessions was a little bit less than we thought, as was the admission. And then on the offset to that was, to Gary's point, on the staffing. So we were hit with, less revenue, a little bit more expenses, and some expenses that we weren't expected. These numbers are final for the most part. I think with, this is what will go with to the auditors, with the exception of that $26,000 invoice, which will be accrued, and if there's any lingering invoices that come in through December, but I think to the best of my knowledge, we try to capture everything, including the December snow removals.
Quick question. What goes into the other income line?
That's pavilion rentals.
That's pavilion rentals?
Yeah.
Well, It's also the fundraising, if we have sponsorships that, for example, TD Bank provided a sponsorship for a couple of our concerts, the other kinds of sponsorships that Bill Lawyer raises, that goes into other income as well. We've also had some just donations to the park that came in.
I just wanted to point out, again, Navy pointed it out, but one of the things that we did not expect was a substantial repair to the tower building and the bathhouse
Right.
that are, again, the subject of future capital work, hopefully. And we've already gotten a grant, excuse me, for the for bathhouse stabilization. But this is an ongoing problem, and we'll discuss it while we're doing the budget for 2018. But you know, the state of repair of the buildings, and to a lesser extent the grounds, obviously, are something that we really have to keep in mind as we go forward, because you know, at any time we could run into a disaster. And as Navy points out, these were not capitalizable.
They were just to keep
they're
the,
just
basically keep the doors
they're
open or
just
keep the
repairs.
Right. Exactly.
Questions from the commissioners at all?
I did. I just had a question about the sewer tax. I was wondering what the discrepancy was between the budget and the actual.
We're actually, I think it had something to do, we're actually looking to see if there's a missing bill, or if there was any reassignment or something. I had Kathy look at that today. Didn't see anything. Don't see if any, I don't know if anything's coming in, but we just did not get a bill or an adjustment or anything like that. Yeah. I don't know if anything's coming in, but by now I would have it does jump out at you.
Yeah.
It did to me as well, and I asked this morning and nothing's come in. That's one of the things I'm thinking, the only thing I can think of is if it's something that's coming in January or February, but nothing to my knowledge. We paid what came in.
Sure.
Yeah.
So because we had additional expenses than revenue, that's, the proportion of that is billed to the city of Rye and Rye Town Park, right? To make up that, or?
Town of Rye,
Town of
yeah.
Rye, I'm sorry, right, Town of Rye.
Yeah.
That's what this number is.
Yeah, and I think, as I said, you know, unless something dramatic happens, it'll be less. The deficit should be, once we record the $26,000 invoice, this should be flat.
This Seaside, well, not Seaside Johnny's, does
Restaurant.
Homestyle, do they know that bill is coming?
I don't
They don't know yet.
They can be really
know.
happy.
Know soon.
Right.
Are they they're contractually obligated to pay it, right?
It's
Yeah.
the
There's nothing
contract.
in their lease about us paying the utilities.
The contract is pretty specific. I went over it with Jeff on Friday, and
Is there any way going forward that the utility bill goes directly to whoever the vendor is
absolute-
instead
There-
of right?
there-
absolutely.
there
It
will
was
be.
it was that way with Seaside Johnny's when they evacuated.
They close their account.
They closed the account. The account was transferred over to us because it was transferred over to us, and it was an oversight that it wasn't transferred back over to Homestyle when they moved in.
I just hope we don't have a hard time
Yeah,
recouping
collecting.
that money.
That remains to be seen.
How's the surplus doing? How are we on the overall? Do we still maintaining a surplus in the
Cash?
cash surplus?
Yes, because we did so well last year, so we didn't feel this deficit in terms of cash flow and
Okay.
being able to meet our obligations and liabilities. So yes, we have a healthy cash balance.
All right. Thank you.
No?
Thank you. Now, we have discussed over the last couple of meetings the care and feeding of the pond. And it was suggested that we do more extensive research, and that is what was done, especially thanks to Bill Lawyer, our assistant director. So, Bill, why don't we start it off, and then we'll get to the presentation by Ms. McGlynn. That's pretty.
I don't, apparently it shut itself down, so I don't know if Fred's around, maybe he can
Fred, could we have a hand here, please?
All the screens went dark a few minutes ago.
At least we're not in Hawaii.
Yeah.
I'll have Sarah take a look unless Fred is running up here.
Well, I can talk a little bit while we're waiting for Fred to.
Are we calling Ms. McGlynn? Or is she
Yeah.
coming here?
When do we call
Yeah,
it?
but I don't think we should do
Here
it
he
until we
is.
can
Here he
get the
is.
screen, because it's okay.
It's got it well under control.
Okay. Just in your packets, in addition to, the fact that we're having this material presented to us from DEC and from Pond Lake Connection, I had written, a few years back, I'd written sort of a draft of a history of the pond, which is in your packet, and also kind of a little highlights of, time frame of what happened when. There's still more detail, obviously, that could be put in about it, but at least it gives everybody some basis for, some general information about what was the pond like and did it end up the way it is now. So, we're going to have this presentation by Kathy McGlynn, and she's going to be doing this on her conference call, and our president of our commission is going to dial the number.
Are we ready for this?
We're ready.
Ready now?
Yeah. And just tell her when she's ready to change slides, to say next slide.
Welcome to WebEx. Enter your access code or meeting number.
Hit pound.
You are the first person to join the meeting. Please stand by.
Well, perhaps since Ms. McGlynn hasn't
Hello?
called.
Hello? Kathy McGlynn, this is Gary Zuckerman, President of the Rye Town Park Commission. I'm joined by all of the other commissioners, Emily Hurd, Josh Cohn, Paul Rosenberg, Benny Salanitro, Bill Lawyer, our Assistant Director, and we have a slide program up on the screen ready for you.
Okay.
And when you want the next slide, say next. So, is that right, Bill?
That's right.
Okay. All right, we're ready to roll.
Okay. So my name is Kathy McGlynn. I'm the Aquatic Invasive Species Coordinator for New York State DEC, and my job is to help implement the Aquatic Invasive Species Management Plan for New York State. And that also includes helping out associations and various lakes and ponds and public entities with their lake management. So folks at Rye asked me to talk about common reed or Phragmites australis. So we'll go to the first slide. So Phragmites is a plant that's native to Europe, at least the aggressive invasive version is native to Europe, and that's basically Phragmites australis, subspecies australis, but there is also a native Phragmites to New York, which is rarely found these days, Phragmites australis, subspecies americanus. So it's always nice to just double check to make sure that what you're addressing is the invasive. So I've given folks a key to do that, and I certainly can provide more information if you're interested in learning more about how to ID those two different subspecies of common reed. So some of the problems with the invasive common reed is that it produces monotypic stands or stands that are almost all Phragmites. There's sometimes an understory of impatiens and maybe another plant or two below, but it's mostly just Phragmites once it invades, and it spreads out in a circular pattern from a central point, and it's very good at creating habitat for itself. So each winter where it drops it's dead plant material that helps to raise the bed above the rising tide because it doesn't like to be completely soaked for long periods of time. So it actually helps to raise the height of the land that it's growing on. It is a threat to certain habitat specialists in marsh areas. When I did my dissertation work, I found that red-winged blackbirds sometimes are able to nest along the edges of the Phragmites clones, but marsh wrens would not do that. So as Phragmites replaces the cattail, that becomes a problem for the specialists like marsh wren. Some of its methods of spread include wind dispersal by seed. There's also vegetative reproduction through plant parts like its roots or rhizomes. And we've noticed that discharge of nutrients, wetland drainage, and salts give Phragmites a competitive edge.
Could you ask her
Its
to
status
say
in
next
Europe
slide?
is, excuse me?
Which slide are you on?
Could you say next slide whenever you're ready to move on, please?
I think
Oh,
we're on
sorry.
4 right now.
Yep, sorry about that. So we're on the, let's go to the Phragmites australis, next slide after the initial Phragmites slide.
Go back.
So its monotypic stands, creates a habitat for itself.
Okay.
Okay, we're at that slide now.
Okay. Yep. So next one is method of spread, which I just discussed. Sorry about that. Wind dispersal of seeds, vegetation through vegetative reproduction through rhizomes or roots. And then there's the discharge of nutrients, which gives the Phragmites competitive advantage, particularly salt. It can deal with higher salinities than most plants along roadside edges in particular, where a lot of the salt runoff takes place during the winter and spring. Then the next slide. Okay. Status in New York. It is considered widespread here, so it is not a high priority for us to control it overall, but we do recommend localized control as needed. So if it's impacting plants and animals of concern or habitats that are of concern or importance to you, then we do encourage that control efforts be made, and we can assist with that in terms of providing technical support. So next slide. Okay, so some forms of Phragmites control include mechanical or manual, chemical, and biological. So the goal of all of these forms of control is to target the right part of the plant at the right time to slow down or stop growth, and to ultimately, if we're able to do that, eliminate it or reduce the population to where it's in a small enough size that it can be carefully maintained and controlled at a minimal amount of energy, time, and expense. So next slide, please. Okay, control. So I do want to remind everyone, which I just do this as a habit for all presentations that I give regarding folks who are embarking on control efforts, that this is a long-term effort. Most plant species of this sort require somewhere between 5 and 10 years to get them really in a good manageable form or eradicate them. I'm very careful about using the word eradicate, and I don't like to use it, so I will just use control, but just keep in mind that this is a long-term project, and there is no silver bullet, and one season of control effort won't take care of it. Based on what I've heard, you've already found that out. Next slide. Okay, mechanical or manual control. So there is some use of disking and dredging, but unfortunately that method can break up rhizomes that can reroute in other locations and can be transported elsewhere by equipment. So that's a problem. In addition, there's some other methods that are used locally, including flattening the Phragmites during the growing season and covering it with black geotextiles, so it basically bakes in the sun each season. And if you go to the next slide, there's an illustration of that, that is a method that's being used at Constitution March. And they've used it for quite a few years, but it's extremely labor intensive. Okay, focusing on just mechanical methods. The next slide, please. You can also potentially work create a program for manipulating the water level to decrease the population under certain conditions. Again, that would be done in consultation with the monitoring of the lake itself, the pond itself, because we do know that Phragmites does not like to be flooded for extensive periods of time. Next slide, please. Chemical control. So I did chat with our pesticide compliance guru, and I checked into our list of pesticides used. And there are more than 200 products that are used for Phragmites control in New York, but majority of those contain only one or two active ingredients. So it's either glyphosate or Mazamox as their active ingredients, and both of these are aquatic-approved formulations in New York State. So both chemicals are non-selective, and they will enter any plant species upon which they have contact via leaves or stems, so it's something you have to be very careful about when you apply them. And the herbicide must be applied by a New York State certified pesticide applicator and will require a permit. Next slide, please. Okay, methods of application. It varies by the infestation. If you have scattered patches of frag, you can use the very labor-intensive stem injection, where you essentially take something that looks like a large hypodermic needle and punch into the stem of the individual Phragmites stems and inject the herbicide into the system where it will be taken up and basically travel through the plant. Or you can do hand wiping methods where you take a glove, a latex glove, which is then overlaid with a cloth glove, which is sprayed with the herbicide, and you will basically run the glove along the stem or the leaves of the plant, which is very good at controlling where you're applying the herbicide, particularly in areas where you have native plants you'd like to protect. For moderate to large stands or dense stands, you can often use a backpack sprayer. Again, you need to be careful about applying this because they can be sprayed during wind times. The spray will be hitting off-target plants. So that's why we generally recommend that for more dense stands where you're less likely to find other plants. You can also use a wick or a dauber, also very labor-intensive. And we recommend inserting dye into the herbicide so you know which ones you whipped and which ones you've not done yet. And then for more dense stands of extensive acreage, you can use a boom spray or aerial application. Okay, next slide, please. What often happens is that there's no one way to deal with frag over the course of the treatment, long-term treatment. So we generally look at and recommend integrated pest management. So it's a combination often of mechanical and chemical methods that are most effective. So oftentimes there'll be herbicide treatment early on that will be followed by mechanical methods. If you go to the next slide for IPM. So let's say you've applied your herbicide during the growing season, then you begin mechanical methods at least 2 weeks after. You want to make sure that the herbicide has been taken in by the plant. And then you mechanically cut the treated plants. And in some cases, you would do that once the ground is frozen to minimize soil disruption. Again, I haven't been to your site, so I'm just generalizing here. So next slide, please. After mowing or cutting has occurred, you need to rake, bag, and dispose of the vegetation because I had mentioned before that they will spread by seed. So you need to make sure those seeds won't germinate. Next slide. Another option to be considered is biological control. And right now, the one that I'm aware of that is available is grazing animals. There have been a number of projects involving Phragmites being essentially grazed upon by goats. There are goat herds that are available for these services. So that is an option in some locations. And there's also research going on at Cornell for moths in their release. They are very cute and very charismatic. So they were very successful in Staten Island, and they've been used elsewhere. They're actually being used at Bard College in Dutchess County for a project there as well. So next slide, please. So I just wanted to give you additional resources for Phragmites info and contacting folks who can help support this work locally. So we have the Lower Hudson Partnership for Regional Invasive Species Management. They are funded through the Environmental Protection Fund. My section, the Invasive Species Coordination section of the DEC, helps to provide oversight for some of their projects. So that's one avenue for finding more information and perhaps some additional help. The Hudson River National Estuarine Research Reserve has been involved in some long-term Phragmites control in Tivoli Bay and are also looking into Phragmites control at several other wetland areas, so they may be a good resource as well. And then once you're thinking about applying an herbicide, you may also want to talk with DEC's Region 3 pesticide compliance folks to figure out what permits you'll need. I'm guessing you'll need at least the Article 15 permit. And I don't know if what you have is a regulated wetland. So if that's the case, you would also need an Article 24 permit. Next slide, please. So I provided you with a list of basically some good bedtime reading. So put it on your nightstand. You can read The Guide to Control and Management of Invasive Phragmites, which is actually quite thorough and good. And there's a link on that slide for you, as well as the Stewart abstract for Phragmites from the Nature Conservancy. So next slide after that, please. So one more. There's also a very great group of people from multiple states across the Great Lakes Basin that hold webinars and have a great website where there's an abundance of information on Phragmites and its control and management, what works and what hasn't worked. So that's the Great Lakes Phragmites Collaborative. That's something you might want to take a peek at as well. It's a really good resource. So that's my spiel about Phragmites, and I'll just go quickly into harmful algal blooms because I have been asked to provide the info about that. So next slide, please. Okay, so are we on the recognizing HAB slide?
Yes.
Okay. So what's not harmful algal bloom is filamentous algae, which is sort of looking thready and cottony. Floating plants, tiny little leaves like watermeal and duckweed. Discolored water and blooms of other types of algae. So next slide, please. Recognizing harmful algal blooms, probably harmful algal blooms would look like they're floating on the surface of the water. There's streaks, clumps, pea soup, or spilled paint appearance, and it's usually bright green, blue-green, whitish, or purple. Next slide. So the New York State statewide approach to HABs, or harmful algal blooms, is basically a collaborative effort between the DEC and the Department of Health, and their goal is to track, document, and communicate about the cyanobacteria. So the general advice that we give folks is to avoid contact, and then we collect information about the number, duration, and intensity of bloom. So that's where our HAB's coordinator works at that level. So what else she's involved in, her name is Rebecca Gorney. If you go to the next slide, please. So she works closely with regional staff, DOH, Parks, or OPRHP, which is our Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation, or Parks for short, lake associations, residents, and recreation groups. She helps to inform publics of the bloom locations and risks. These are actually posted on a web page, a DEC web page dedicated to this. She will take samples of blooms. She is looking to help get research done on certain causes and coordinating surveillance programs for these blooms, and also providing information about how to take action to reduce nutrient sources. And what I think is really valuable here for you, and I don't know if this has already taken place for your pond, is we encourage folks to develop a lake management plan or a watershed management plan, which may be too much to ask for this town, but thinking about your pond, and maybe what I'm seeing is most invasive species and algal blooms are symptomatic of other issues, often nutrient issues within the water body, so that's something to consider. Okay, next slide is just an illustration of some of the HAB reports from this past year across New York, and you can see that there's quite a concentration in southeastern New York. So next slide. What you can do, again, if you see a bloom, send photos to habsinfo@dc.ny.gov. Rebecca will respond to that report, and her phone number is also there. And then the next slide, just thanking you for giving me the opportunity to share this information with you, and there's my contact email there, and I'm happy to answer any questions. And if I don't know the answers, I can find people who do. So I will take notes as we chat.
All right, thank you very, very much, Kathy. That was really much appreciated. I'm sure it gave us more information than we could ever have thought would be possible. But it was very, very extensive. Thank you so much. Questions from any of the commissioners? Nope. Right.
So,
Well,
Kathy, if you could stick around and hear what James has to say, that might be useful.
Can you do that?
okay. And
Okay.
I can. I apologize for getting on late. I was actually sitting on the conference
you
call
weren't
for
late.
several.
You were not late at all. Not late at all.
Okay.
Perfect
Okay.
timing. Thank you.
James Gorman is here
Okay.
from the Pond Lake Connection.
Talk to the
microphone.
Talk to the microphone.
Anyway, so you're going to be now hearing from James Gorman, who works for the company, and he's our Frazier. He's the Frazier of the pond. You know, he's the guy who comes and does the treatments, who evaluates the tests
Okay.
and things. So he'll be telling you about what he does and what the issues are.
Okay, sounds good.
Hello, everybody. I'm James from the Pond and Lake Connection. In 2012, you guys contracted us to start managing the pond, the park. It's about 5 years now. We're a pond and lake management company. We service Connecticut, New York, New Jersey. We do all kinds of.
Kathy, can you hear okay?
I can, thank you.
Okay.
We control aquatic vegetation, whether it's algae, floating vegetation, submerged vegetation, emergent vegetation. We do nutrient reduction, aeration, education, invasive species monitoring, fish stocking, water testing. What we do specifically for Friary Town Park, you guys contracted us to control algal blooms in the pond. Algae is kind of a benefit to a pond at certain levels. It's the beginning of the food chain. But at the same time, it can't be looking greener than the yard or the grass around it. Can end up smelling. It can be dangerous depending on the situation. If you were swimming in there, the park pond is pretty much for looking at, but you can see correlates out to a home pond, swim camp pond, that kind of stuff. Algae is everywhere. You need a couple things to get it to actually grow, but they're finding it in the glaciers, they're finding it in the desert in Afghanistan. The troops are having problems with algae. That's what we're looking for in space. So the minute we start adding light and moisture, which we can't really control in a pond setting, the only thing we can control is the amount of food that it has. So an over nutrient loaded pond, it allows it to just be a 2-foot ring to 100% covered, depending on the other things that are going on in the pond. So what we try and do is figure out what's going on with the nutrients, and we deal with that. So your watershed is really uncontrollable. We can't control what's going on up the street, all those pipes coming into your pond. Nobody's fertilizing around that pond in those fields, you know. So there's really nothing we can do there. We try and keep a balance of plants actually in the pond. The only thing we actually treat for is the algae. So let's just say, for example, if there was lily pads growing in there, they're using nutrients that would otherwise go to algae. We're not really doing anything to remove lilies. You know, we're specifically targeting the algae. The one thing that I wanted to discuss with you guys is one duck produces a half a pound of phosphorus a year. Phosphorus is the big nutrient. So 8 ducks, which it's easy to say that there's 8 ducks in that pond, is literally a ton of algae a year, just from the ducks. So that's something that I think that we should try. And if you're trying to move on from using chemicals and stuff, one of the things I think we have to try and do is move on from the ducks. That many ducks in the pond. It's more of a 2-duck pond than a 12 to 20 duck pond, honestly. So
It is called the duck pond.
I'm aware of that, and I'm aware of the idea that it is a park. We come here, we're only looking at it. We have to have wildlife, otherwise it's just somebody's swimming pool with flowers growing around it. Completely appreciate it. I'm just telling you what's going on with the
kids love to feed the ducks.
Then that's why we got to, that's why we have a
problem.
contract. Absolutely. So
Full balance.
I wouldn't have a job if we weren't feeding things. What do we do for you guys specifically? So one of the first things we did was we switched from a decorative fountain to a high oxygen fountain. The reason we did that was the more oxygen, the more zooplankton that's in the pond. Zooplankton are kind of part of the beginning of the food chain for other things. They also eat algae. So the more oxygen, the more of them, in theory, less algae. Also, the bacteria that's in your pond naturally help break down all the leaves and the things that are in there. That's fertilizer, that's fuel for the algae. So by adding more oxygen, you're helping break that down. It also keeps the water moving, keeps it from being stagnant. Less mosquitoes, stagnant waters, mosquitoes, you move water, no mosquitoes, so there's that as well. We also add beneficial bacteria. So there's bacteria already in your water, in your pond, breaking that stuff down. The more we add, the more they can break down. Just like anything else, there's some that are specific for, these work better for pine needles, or this works better for leaves, or this is more of a grass clipping situation. So we're able to add more bacteria to your pond to help break that stuff down. We also do algicide applications. So usually like about June, middle of June, when all these other biological things that we're doing, we're not keeping the algae back. Once we get about a 2-foot to 3-foot ring, we would consider that 30% of the pond. You know, we put notification with the DEC, we do an algae treatment. We're using the least active amount of copper that you could use. So for example, copper sulfate is 100% copper. Chemical we're using now is called Q-trine. It's 8% copper. So knowing that
8%?
yes, sir. So knowing that we have to use copper, we have to do something. Let's try and use the, you know, the least amount of active ingredient as we can. We come about 7 times a year. Try and start in May. Depends on when spring starts, when winter ends. Come about every 3 weeks after that, depending on weather, pressure. So we're limited a little bit about what we can do. Everything is heavy nutrient. A lot of the products in New York we can't use to reduce nutrients because in New York it's your intent with the product. So in theory, if I had honey and I knew that it would get rid of algae forever in your pond, like killing algae, I'm using it as an algicide. Now it has to be a permitted activity, and New York has to approve that. So we're restricted in New York as to things that we can use. There's other products available in other states. So, you know, we can search online all day about, oh, well, why aren't we using this? Why aren't we using that? I would say half the time it's probably because it's just not legal in New York to do. The permit we have to do every single year is heavily reviewed. It takes about 3 months to get a permit. So, you know, if, for example, this was May 1st, we were deciding we're going to go forward with it, it's probably too late for the year. So that's a having factor. We're only allowed to use certain amounts of products. We're only allowed to treat half the pond at a time. We're only allowed to treat X amount of times a year. So they are keeping an eye on what we're doing, keep us from over treating and, you know, actually managing the pond. But depending on the situation, it puts a limit on what we're trying to do. It was a fast talk. It's quick. Do you have any questions? I know you didn't want anybody to really ask questions. Very familiar with Phragmites, stuff like that. If there was something that didn't translate in the talk, I'd be happy to talk about that.
I'd like to know if Catherine has any questions. Kathy, you still there?
I'm a little curious. Yeah, I'm still here. I was wondering, in terms of the number of copper treatments, you said you average every 3 weeks, so that would be 4 or 5 times per season?
No, ma'am.
Several years?
We come every 3 weeks or so. I would say, on average, we do 3 to 4 half pond treatments a year. So the whole pond probably only gets treated 2 times as an average a year. We come just to come, check things out. We do the biological treatments. We clean out the fountains. You know, there's other things that we do as part of our contract. But no, on average, I would say it's 2 full pond treatments a year with copper.
I have a question.
Okay.
From the
Debbie Reiser, the commission secretary.
from the conditions that we have on site and the Phragmites that we have, in your estimation, have we determined, are they the invasive species or the native species?
They are the invasive species, yes. And I would say that even still, it's aggressive in your situation. They're going to walk around the whole perimeter of the pond, even where the stone wall is. And it won't be long because of the bottom. I would expect it to come from the peninsula out even towards that Duck Island, even though there's no soil there. Underneath, it's all muddy. It's 2 feet. I would expect them to continue to move out. Something that we brought up in the past of like, hey, keep in check. If you guys weren't doing the cutting that you were doing, it would already be worse than it is.
So is there a strategy that you would recommend the commission consider with regard to dealing with the Phragmites?
Yes, and we had recommended the herbicide application in conjunction with the cutting that you were doing. So in a vacuum, I believe they're already cut down now, but we would want to cut them in the winter. And we found that the best time to chemically treat them is in the fall. The plant's sending stuff down to the roots to store for the winter, and it's going to bring that chemical down to the roots. If we did it in July, you could understand how everything's coming up. All the water's going up to try and keep the plants happy. A certain time of year, they shut down if it's too hot. So that's the one thing we also recommended. It's growing in and among all your wildflowers and stuff. A lot of them have started to shut down, certainly by the end of August. And those frags are 8 feet tall, so any application that we did would actually be protecting a lot of the understory because it is so tall. If the plants were as tall as these chairs, then we'd be getting into the labor-intensive wicking, hand wiping of the plants, and you could see how stuff would get missed, or you could easily run into problems hitting up all the wildflowers. So that was part of our proposal, so more of a fall approach to it.
So basically, the Phragmites problem should be addressed, in your view, by cutting at this point and then in the fall treating.
Yeah, cutting right now for a variety of reasons. One, it's easier to do. The other stuff that you guys have spent, I can't imagine how much money on, isn't there, in theory, to get in the way. You can be as aggressive as you want, back machines up, anything that you need to do to get it out now. The ground is frozen, so some areas that were muddy, where maybe guys wouldn't do as good of a job, if they gotta be in knee-deep mud to get out, the ground's frozen, maybe the guy takes the extra effort, gets it down lower, gets more stuff cleaned up. The other thing too is all that dead stuff is just adding to the seed bed. It's adding to areas for that stuff to grow, and it kind of complicates what's green, what's dead from last year. Think about all that stuff just matting up. In the same way that you pick up the leaves and sticks in your yard, it would be one of the reasons you would do it now. Be in a vacuum, cut everything down so it's short, and then in the fall hit it. So,
Is there anything to do between now and the summer?
not really. I mean, unfortunately, because of all the other things that you have going on there, it's not like we could just say, well, let's just get the backhoe over there, scrape this up, we're doing this other project, we'll bury it, and we'll bring some new dirt in. You would lose everything that you gained there. You got that waterfall, you got all the other rock features there. So in this case, if this was a patch growing in the yard or like along a ditch someplace, the goats, we could put up a fence and put the goats in there and let's see what happens. But you can't put an electric fence up inside that little peninsula, get the goats to just eat the frags and not, $1,000 worth of wildflowers at least, There's a reason that they eat any, so, yeah, I would love to, So unfortunately, if they were growing along the sand on the beach, it would be a completely different conversation, but inside this relatively small area, I mean, from a square footage standpoint, we're not talking acres worth of frags here. It's 3,000, 4,000 square feet max. So.
All right. Okay.
And just because she brought it up, you guys have had no harmful algal blooms. We've been strictly filamentous algae. Normally, it's a planktonic algae-based problem, and in my time here, I haven't seen any of that here. So, as scary as that is, it's something to keep an eye on. But you haven't had any history of that yet. So.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate it. Any questions from commissioners?
Well, just so I understand, you submitted 2 proposals, and one of them, the only difference is one includes the Phragmite treatment and the other is not.
Correct. And in this specific case, because of how they're growing and where they're growing, we won't need any extra permitting to be done. So we don't need to walk out of this meeting saying, yes, we got to get this permit in, we got to get this started, you have to do it now. This decision can be made 36 hours prior to us making the treatment. So if you guys said, you know what, we still want to think about it, as long as like Labor Day, let's say, we had a general idea that this is what we want to do so that I could pick the right timing. Let's say, for example, it's a drier year, things start shutting down sooner. For whatever reason, it's cooler. Last year, we ended up treating way later than normal because of how mild it was. And so as much as when does fall start, might not be in October, but it could be in September, so as long as you knew by Labor Day, it wouldn't change anything that we were doing.
So is there a danger for chemicals running out into the sound that you use?
I would say that I'm going to be using about 6 total ounces of chemical to treat those frags. And I have to do it on a nice sunny day so that it dries. Think about it, if I was doing it in the rain, it would wash off. It needs to stay on the plant. The sound is a non-factor. The bigger concern would be, hey, is he going to hit the ornamental grasses that are there or the flowers that are there? that would be the impact or the concern that I would expect, you know.
Is the permit required for each treatment, or is it good for an annual permit? How does it work?
It's good for the year. There's restrictions within the permit, though. For example, your permit will say that you can only do 3 treatments per season.
Mm-hmm.
That's 3 half-acre, or half-pond treatments, so there's 6 of them, if you will. But that's the restriction, is the 3.
What would be the downside in getting the permit in place in advance of making a decision?
None, and I have it here for Debbie to sign. I meant deciding to treat the frags. You could make that
Right,
decision.
no, I understand.
But the,
That's in proposal two.
Right.
but the copper, the algae treatments and stuff, I have that permit here. The sooner the better. I
Right.
believe 2 years ago, there was some turnover and the permit got delayed, and it was almost June before we were able to do something, and it was a real
Okay.
catch-up, so.
But that permit that you're talking about that's ready to go will include the Phragmites as well?
The frags are not needing a permit
Oh, they don't?
in this situation. no.
Okay, all right, okay.
That's why I'm saying you can wait till Labor Day to
Yeah,
do that.
I think we should probably do that in advance anyway. Okay, good.
Thank you.
Thank you,
for your
Kathy.
presentation. Kathy, thank you very much.
Thank you too. Much appreciated.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.
Debbie, is this presentation is available online? I mean, we have it on our website? I was looking for it.
It's not posted on our website. It was in your online
Okay.
agenda, and we certainly can post it on the website.
That agenda that I don't get, right? Oh, the online, you mean the one that you emailed us?
It's in your binder, too.
I was looking for it, I didn't find it. I got a lot of bills in here and proposals, but I didn't see the,
All right.
all right.
Next item is the resolution authorized me to enter into a contract with Pond Lake Connection, similar to the one from last year, for an amount not to exceed $5,000, I believe, and that is per the proposal, which is actually less than $5,000. So may I have a motion and a second?
So moved.
Second, on the question?
Discussion?
Yes, a question. How have our costs, have they remained steady? Have they increased since we last got a bid for this work, which was 5 years ago or 6 years ago?
This, our costs have been steady for the last several years. This is the first year they've gone up, and they're going up very moderately.
I have the exact numbers if you want.
Yeah, that'd be great. Sure. Thanks, James.
20, and they're rounded. 2012 was 3,500, and then from 2013 to 2016, it stayed the same at 3,960. And then this year, there was a 15% raise because of the permitting process has changed dramatically. It's required more stuff on our end. And then if you took the frag part out of that, that's it. It's $200 really is what it amounted to. But we've been able to keep the price the same. As a percentage, it's raised less than 20% in the 6 year, this being the 6th year. So, just so you know.
Okay.
Also on a question, we talked with the Friends. Is there a monetary contribution towards this from the Friends, or is this all on RTP?
Well, this is ours, I believe.
Bill?
Debbie?
For a number of years after the pond was finished, for a number of years after the pond was finished, and it was finished in 2005, the Friends, who had raised about $150,000 of their own money towards the project, were using that towards the annual costs for maintenance.
Right.
And, you know, I saw some of the early proposals that were part of the grant application. They were projecting costs of somewhere around $5,000 a year for maintaining this pond, recognizing the issues as to what we're dealing with in terms of algae and Phragmites. So I think, and the Friends are here, so you can tell me, but for the last couple of years, we have not had any funding from the Friends. They've focused all their money on the trees. And of course, we would be certainly happy to accept funds, but we understand, at least I do, that the Friends have limited resources, and I think they can make more of a difference on the tree issue. And so, I don't know if anybody else.
All right.
You ran out of money? Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
We did pay for the cutting.
Yes, you did.
Yes.
Yes, I remember.
Actually, twice this year, but right now, the pond is
Yeah,
beyond
it's,
our focus.
okay.
Yeah, we're going to visit the Phragmites issue again, as Benny suggested, prior to the fall, so we can be right on top of that. Deb, please call the roll.
Commissioner Hurd,
Yes.
Commissioner Cohn,
Yes.
Commissioner Rosenberg,
Yes.
Commissioner Salanitro,
Yes.
President Zuckerman.
Yes, thank you. Capital projects. The seawall, we have a memo in the file that we received from Dolph Rofeld, our engineer, which is substantially more detailed than any previous memo, setting the price, the estimate for almost $790,000, 90% of which would be reimbursed by FEMA. The rest of the memo deals with process. We need to get final FEMA approval, and also Beth Evans, Associate, our environmental consultant, hopefully has applied for a permit to conduct work in the coastal erosion zone. And as I say, the balance, we're not going to know a real number until we get construction bids, but assuming that the number is in that range, the difference between the amount reimbursed by FEMA and the actual amount will be funded 60% by the town of Rye and 40% by the city of Rye. Obviously, we'll have to have further discussions going forward about how that's all going to be accomplished, but that's where we are today, and hopefully we can move forward and get this done before the summer season and the bird nesting season. When is the bird nesting season, Bill?
June or July.
Right, so we want to get it done before that. The bathhouse roof replacement, Debbie, you've been in contact with Lisa. We also have a memo in the file about that. That project will not be moving as quickly as we had hoped because of DASNY review. We had hoped to be in construction by the spring, but it looks like this will be taking place more to the fall. This is the money we're getting. The estimate was $300,000. I'm not sure that's an accurate estimate, but we're getting what, $250 from the state?
Right,
$250,000
$250 from the state, and
Right.
we're to match by $100,000.
And again, that would carry a 60-40 match from the town and the city. The ramps, we did not, as I reported last month, we did not get the community development grant block funds to make the ramps handicap accessible. I'd like to talk to the commission going forward about the commission funding the south ramp, which is the ramp that is not near the restaurant, but at the south gate, which has a lower pitch and I think will be far less expensive. And I'd like to go forward and get estimates for that work so that we can make an informed decision as to whether we should do that or not. Obviously, that's a budgetary item, it's a capital improvement, and the commission will have to make a decision as to whether or not we're going to go forward with that on our own dime. As Trustee Ferraro mentioned last meeting, sometimes it's easier to get state funding when you can show that you have skin in the game. So, excuse me, it might be easier to get funding for the middle ramp in the future if we show them that we're already funding improvement to the south ramp. Obviously, the middle ramp is more important because that's what most people use, is the middle ramp. But failing that, I think that we owe our less abled community, not only those in wheelchairs, but senior citizens, et cetera, who may find difficulty getting down the south ramp, easier access to get to the beach through at least the south gate. So,
Gary, just tonight, I just handed Debbie some materials, some brochures that is an available product that may suit our needs, more on a removable type structure that would maybe be more cost-effective, provide the same essential needs for handicap access to and from the beach. So Debbie, I'll work with you on that if we'll bring them over. So just some other ideas. Now's the time to start thinking about it, and I agree, we do need to do something on one of the ramps. So
we can get copies of this, or can we
Yeah,
get this
I gave it to Debbie.
scanned?
Well, I think once, you can do anything, but there's websites for it.
Yeah, well, scan it and send it to the commission. Okay? All right.
Okay.
Okay, the next items are going to hopefully require not a long but a short executive session. I'm talking about discussion regarding information technology and park infrastructure. We have a potential contract that really hasn't been discussed with the commissioners in toto, and as a matter of contract discussion, we need to do that. Also, we have to have a discussion regarding personnel and legal matters, and some of the proposals that came forward as contract matters from Lisa Easton. I had originally suggested an executive session regarding the search for the park director. I'm not sure that we need an executive session on that. The other commissioners can determine that. We have had informal discussions amongst ourselves regarding, and I brought it up at the last commission meeting, about selecting a subcommittee of the commission to choose the park director, or to narrow it down. The commission will choose the park director, but to have a subcommittee to narrow down the search from the original 40 applications, which Debbie received, approximately 40. Debbie narrowed the number down herself to approximately 12, and by conducting telephone interviews, and then narrowed that down to approximately 5. It would be the function of the commission, of the subcommittee, to review that and to hopefully come up with one or at the most 2 finalists that the entire commission would then interview and choose. Commissioners that have volunteered to be on that subcommittee are Emily Hurd from the City of Rye, Benny, who's my appointee on the commission from Rye Neck, and Mayor Falanka of Portchester, and the 2 citizen representatives who have been spoken to, and I hope there's no objection, is Carolyn Walker from the City of Rye, who's in the audience, and I've asked Bill Villanova, former councilman of the town of Rye, to serve as the citizen representative from the town. And if that is okay with the commission, I'd like to get a voice approval that we go forward with that. And move it as expeditiously as possible. Motion?
So moved?
Second.
All in favor?
Yes.
Who seconded it?
I did.
All in favor?
Aye.
None opposed. Thank you, and welcome, Carolyn. Welcome back to the fold. For those who may be watching on TV, Carolyn has been an active participant in park matters for many years. I do not know her as well as others do, such as Debbie and Emily, and from the City of Rye, and I think that you will be a terrific addition to the committee, and along with Billy. For those of you who don't know, Bill Villanova former deputy supervisor, has been active in park matters as well, and knows many of the employees, and has an intimate knowledge of the park. So I think that that will be an excellent committee to narrow our search. So,
Can I just ask a logistical question?
Sure.
Debbie, will you be moving that committee forward in terms of meeting?
I'm
or
sorry, Debbie will be on the
Okay.
committee too. She will be secretary
Okay,
to the committee
great.
and coordinating all of the meetings.
Great.
And hopefully we'll be able to do it in one meeting. But that's up to the committee. So with that, may I have a motion to go into executive session to discuss personnel, legal matters, and contract matters?
Mr. President, do you want to do any the public session first, so that when we come out, we don't have to come back out
Yeah,
for
no,
the
no.
public?
We
Oh, you're
will
going to
do a
come?
public session when we come out.
Oh, you are, okay.
Yes,
Okay.
because at that time, we may be approving the contract for IT support
Okay.
and possibly the Lisa Easton contract proposal, although we may not. That's the subject of the discussion. I hope that it won't last us too long. But may I have a motion and a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, we're going to adjourn to the back room, and we will return. We are back in public session. The next item on the agenda is a resolution authorizing the commission to enter into a contract with Computronics for information technology consulting service and point-of-sale IT infrastructure for Rytown Park. Debbie, for the public, just very briefly, what is the purpose of this?
The purpose of the contract is to secure a firm that is going to provide IT support for the 2018 season, that's going to get our computers and the server set up back out at the park, and to ensure that we have internet connectivity so that the payroll system will work. And in addition, they are going to be looking at our point of sale service and providing consulting services to ensure that we have a functioning point of sale service that will last us through the season and hopefully on into the future. This is a step toward upgrading our IT infrastructure.
And Debbie, there are exigent circumstances for entering into this contract.
Yes, correct. We were notified just last Thursday that our point-of-sale consultant, Michael Lazarus, will not be working for us this spring, as had been planned. And on an emergency basis, Computronics has submitted a proposal that they can start tomorrow working on
We've
this
gotten
to
other
solve.
similar proposals, correct?
We've gotten IT support proposals that went out to I got 3 bids. I did not anticipate the point of sale necessity being quite so fast.
Okay, thank you. May I have a motion and a second?
So moved.
Second?
Aye.
Please call the roll.
Commissioner Hurd,
Yes.
Commissioner Cohn,
Yes.
Commissioner Rosenberg,
Yes.
Commissioner Salanitro,
Yes.
President Zuckerman.
Yes. Public comment on non-agenda items. Any members of the public wish to speak? Hearing none. May I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Meeting is adjourned. Our next meeting is February 20th, right back here at Village Hall in Rybrook.
Jerry, so just